Most modern vampire stories fit into one of three categories: the modern, ultra-sexed teen vampire story, the classic Stoker-esque story, or the gritty, modern, and particularly violent story. And most, if not all, of the stories based on the tabletop RPG setting of Vampire the Masquerade fall into that final category. But the setting doesn't always make the leap to other forms of entertainment very well. But the game I'm looking at today, Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines, shows exactly how it should be done. Hell, it shows exactly how to adapt just about any tabletop RPG setting to the gaming world. And like any good RPG, that begins with character creation. Bloodlines doesn't limit your options to cosmetics or basic classes. You can pretty much do whatever you want in regards to creating your character, assigning your stats any way you see fit. Though different vampire clans, the game's version of races, are better suited to certain kinds of builds. It can be a bit overwhelming, though the game does have the sort of Elder Scrolls option where you can answer some questions and get a character made that way, though it isn't the best way to go if you know what you're doing. Then you get dumped into a fascinating new world. Set in nighttime Los Angeles, Bloodlines introduces you to a seedy underworld filled with vampires and pretty much the entire paranormal pantheon, from ghosts to werewolves. But what makes the setting of Vampire the Masquerade so much more interesting than a lot of other vampire fiction is that it's set in places that people can identify with. The seedy street corners and alleyways that run through every city, lined with flickering lights, peeling paint, and faded signs. And that setting, while familiar, also vibes extremely well with Bloodlines' fictional world of vampire seduction, politicking, and murder. But while the world of Vampire the Masquerade still intrigues, time has treated Bloodlines' other trappings far more poorly. Action segments as a whole seem poorly thought out. The shooting is a god-awful mess. The melee is functional, but extremely basic. And that's not to say that these mechanics were that incredible when they first came out in 2004. Bloodlines is somewhat notorious for the mess it was at release. The game basically wasn't done. Huge portions of it didn't work entirely or were just barely playable. And while fan patches that are basically required to play the game properly have made it far more complete, fixing quests and adding a tutorial that was seemingly cut at the last minute, it's still buggy in quite a few ways, perhaps the most noticeable being the horrible glitchy animation system. And its incomplete nature shows in other places as well. At times it shows a willingness to introduce variety, like a surprisingly effective sequence inside of a haunted, abandoned hotel that doesn't involve combat at all. But then for the rest of the game, you're pretty much doing the same thing over and over, entering combat areas and killing a whole bunch of enemies, or sometimes managing to sneak past them. There's variety in the stories and in the dialogue and in the dialogue choices you have, and it's incredibly well conveyed given the technical limitations at play here, but it's let down by its actual gameplay. So, the most effective parts of the game inevitably have nothing to do with that gameplay. The options here for role-playing are incredibly complex and in-depth, offering you choices of political allegiances, questions of how much of your humanity is left after your conversion to a vampire, even allowing you to create a completely insane character. Bloodlines is so willing to break the agreed-upon rules of game development, daring to do things like giving the player the ability to choose a type of vampire that can only traverse the city through the sewers, making you miss vast sections of environments. Bloodlines is a wonderfully well-crafted role-playing game with a ton of options to customize your character, an intriguing world and story, but for a lot of people, all the initial goodwill those things impart will be quickly swept away by the awful mechanics the game has in store for them. Others, like myself, will be willing to wade through the crap, the bugs and the glitches and the poor design choices in order to unearth the truly enjoyable RPG that lies underneath. If you do decide this game's for you, I highly recommend you pick up the GOG version. The Steam version doesn't come with the fan patches, so you have to install them yourself, which isn't particularly difficult, but it is required, and the GOG version already has them installed, so it's one less step you have to go through. And again, that fan patch fixes so much and adds so much back into the game that it's basically required if you actually want to have fun with this game. I'll also note that it does work perfectly fine on Windows 10 with the fan patch. No problems whatsoever. Widescreen support's there. Everything is fine. And I was able to play through the entire game with absolutely no problems. Every Monday, I look at a game that's at least 10 years old, and I see how it's held up today, if it's still worth playing now. If you like that idea, be sure to subscribe so you can see the latest videos. If you like this video in particular, be sure to hit that like button, and thanks for watching.